Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. As I tend to say, it's always a good morning on a Wednesday when I get to see you and we get into conversation together. So I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we like to get every conversation started, which I believe I definitely start every day off with the gratitude moment. And I'll start by sharing what I'm grateful for this morning. I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. I'm grateful for, again, my mother to be alive, be of sound mind, and had the opportunity now. I call it an opportunity. She needs me to and my brother to alternate days to come by and cook for her because she's losing her independence, and it's a horrible thing to watch. But the blessing is I get to cook for my mom and have her teach me how to cook, so I get to learn some things. So it's just a different way we can interact with one another and share time. So that's a blessing to have that. So I just want to add that. And then finally, I just want to say I'm also grateful for, again, the challenges. I have different challenges I'm dealing with right now. And I know that through the solution to the challenges, that's where growth comes from. So I'm thankful for the challenges I have in my life because without those, there can't be growth. So
Yeah, beautiful. So I really echo all of that. So thanks for sharing it. And I'm just I'm grateful for my typical things like indoor plumbing, heat in the winter, a refrigerator with mostly fresh food in it. And more specifically today I'll be really concrete. So yesterday we got some snow here in the Northeast, first significant snowstorm of the winter. This is today's March 1st, so it was the 27th to 28th, and there's parts of this big deck where I live and in a front walkway. And I used to love cutting grass and shoveling snow and raking leaves because it was immediate gratification. So you have snow and then you shovel it and it's cleaned up and and you can walk on it and it looks there's a visual change, a tactile change. And so I still it's a great thing because some of the work that we do you don't get immediate, it takes some time to get the result. So I love it because of that. And then yesterday I was thinking, because I'm in my late 60s and I'm just grateful that I don't enjoy the moving the snow as much, but I can still do it. And I'm grateful to have a body that can still, I might shovel it a little bit slower than I used to, but I can still move the snow, push it, throw it, and all that. So I'm just grateful that I have a functioning, primarily healthy body at my age. And, I hope to continue that. So that's my gratitude for today.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, how about we go ahead and get things started, and you give us the context for what our topic is going to be today.
Yeah, so we're speaking about my book, Healing America's Narratives, and there's thank you for that. Those of you who have been to the podcast before, that's the first time we're showing it that way. I usually wave it, so thanks, King, for putting it up there that way. And so Healing America's Narratives, a feminine, masculine, our collective national shadow. And what we're doing now in the last few weeks, we've been talking about chapter 11 of the book, which is the first 10 chapters were prescribing and diagnosing the problems, the historical underlying issues with our narratives and our shadow. Chapter 11, which is called So Now What, begins to introduce ways we can perhaps heal our collective and individual narratives and work with our collective shadow and our individual shadows as well. So for the past few conversations, we've been looking at some questions and statements that are important to explore these narratives and these comments. And so far, the last few weeks, we've explored who am I really? Everything is a story. What's my impact and what impacts me? Last week, we spoke about the question, what am I not seeing? And then today, we're going to address a question that can be interpreted in a lot of ways. So I really like it. And the question is, who are my people? And tangentially, King, you and I have touched on that in terms of how we identify the people that we want to be in conversation with, nowadays. But it's it's a pretty important question. And what I've learned through the writing of the book and trying to pay attention to how I answer the question is it's directly related to our developmental worldview. So if I'm I have a me-centered worldview, I might enter who are my people or answer who are my people in one way. If I have an us-centered worldview, or I identify with specific groups or one specific group, I might answer another way. If I have an all of us centered worldview, where I believe all humans are equal and we're the same species, and that's actually how I live, my people will be different. And if I have an all that is centric worldview, in other words, I really feel connected to the entire universe or all of creation, however you want to say it, my response might shift then again. So it's I think all of these statements and questions are important. So I want to say it's one of the more important, but it's not. It's another important question that can lead to a shifting of narratives and perhaps an insight into shadow. So who are my people?
What's interesting is that as I think about all the questions that we've been discussing over the last couple of weeks, exactly how aligned we are with each other, because that's really the path I'm on, and definitely what I'm more focused on at this point in my life is pretty much all those questions, understanding, who I am, what's my impact in the world. Now we're talking about the question of who are my people. That's directly in line with what I advocate, which is building connection with each other in tribes. So I'm a person that, society forces us into these tribes, whether we want to. Some folks say silos, I say tribes, because I think silos are more in the context of just you're with a group of people. I think tribes is much more engaging in the context of alignment, in the context that if you're a Black male, you are going to have a lot of things in common. I don't think Simon's silos, in my opinion, are as in common as tribes. So that's why I make the distinction. But as I was saying, I love each topic because it's directly in line with my thinking and what I'm advocating, and what I'm really worried that folks don't see the importance of being selective on all those questions. Who are my people speaks directly to me, to how you go about seeing the world, because I do believe we are our 5 closest people as far as the people we spend time with, the people we engage with. So if you are engaged with a bunch of people who are, hate mongering about a different group of people because of their religion, their race, their sexual orientation, then, and you saying, well, I don't think that way, it's going to be very hard for you to really distance yourself if you're surrounding yourself with those folks and giving them a lot of your time and a lot of your attention. So that's why I advocate that you choose people. That's why I call connecting with intent. You intentionally build your connections with people who are in line with you. And that requires some work. That requires some deep introspective analysis. That requires you to kind of back away for a moment from the group dynamic and look at yourself as an individual, and then begin to construct yourself and build yourself up as an individual before you can begin to interact and engage in the group dynamic. So that's why I love your book, because now that once you begin to really build on that, you begin to now understand, first, accept the fact that there are false narratives in this country. This country's been built on false narratives. We talked before about the power of story and the power of narrative, how each of us have our own story. So I think that the lessons that the historical significance of which you lay out in the book is definitely very important. It's very critical to understand the past and understand where we're going in the future. But as we lay out this last chapter, in chapter 11, the steps of how do we begin to really build fully human connections, each step that you lay out is extremely important. And I just want to close on this by saying that I found, again, this is me personally sharing, that when I build with people I'm aligned with, and I build relationships, I have conversations, just like last we got a conversation with a woman who I've interviewed on my podcast. I met her in Baltimore City. She's doing some phenomenal work. It's a nonprofit. I'm not going to really say her name because I don't want to put that out there just yet, but I just want to talk about her as the case study of my point I'm making. And she's of the Jewish faith, and we had lunch together, and we met because we were both in attendance at this function that was put on changing the conversation between blacks and Jews to try to get blacks and Jews to begin to start dialoguing with each other and stop seeing each other as potential enemies, which was, all the things that was coming out with, Kanye West and all the rhetoric he was talking about. So anyway, she and I had this great lunch, and during the lunch, we got the chance to see each other really as human beings. We didn't see each other, and I said this before, but I definitely want to really emphasize this. I didn't see her as a Jewish woman. She didn't see me as a black man. We saw each other as human beings, and we had a great conversation that led to how we can begin to start building. Because now that we didn't have that bias, that personal bias, as you say, our cultural givens didn't block our view of each other, we were able to have a true dialogue. And now we're looking to start to build with one another and begin to start referring connections in our network and use our social capital. So those are all the potential of what I say, building connections in the tribe and knowing who your people are. That's the importance of it.
Yeah. I mean, I love that last example, because you've been sharing, some of the results of your having attended that event in Baltimore with Jews and African Americans together, and that's a great example. Where and I think I love to eat, so there's no better way to see somebody else as a fully human being than sitting across from them at a table somewhere, whether it's in my own kitchen or in a restaurant or whatever, and having a meal and having a conversation. So that's what we do. That it's a food and eating can be in addition to its nourishing requirement, just nutritional requirements, can be a wonderful social moment as well, where we can just see, oh yeah, this is what we do. We need to eat. We love to talk, and we're wired to connect. So I love that example. And it's just something that appeared today's New York Times. There was an op-ed piece from a senior at Princeton University, and he was talking about, and this is tied in with who are my people, and for the most part he's seems to lean liberal. Princeton, as most major universities are, tend to be left leaning, not necessarily extreme, but some of them are extreme. And he wrote a piece saying that my liberal university is moving free expression to the right. And what he meant by that, and that's not an exact, I don't have it up in front of me, I'm not going to look for it now, but he was basically making the argument that Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff made in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, that the liberal bias, the political correctness, and being woke on college campuses nowadays, and by nowadays I mean in the last, we're in 2023, at least 10 to 15 years, leads students and even faculty members to be afraid to speak their minds because they might get called out on using the wrong word or the wrong language. And there's been, they've attempted to ban more conservative thinkers or speakers from presenting on campus, like a guest lecturer. And that's, and he wrote a pretty, I thought it was a pretty good op-ed piece. And even my saying that, so I'll catch myself, I thought it was pretty good. And what I'm really saying is he cited a lot of the same sources for his brief opinion piece as I cite in the book. Some of them were identical. So the Coddling of the American Mind book and a few other things he mentioned. And he just pointed to his beginning to see the problem with, and I'm going to project this onto him now, but he was basically saying that his people, the more liberal-minded people at Princeton, were alienating free speech in a major university. And that's a problem in most of the major universities now. In an attempt to protect a certain number of people, they're not allowing the exchange of ideas, especially ideas with which they disagree. And that's a really bad thing in a freedom of expression academic setting, because that's what the university is for. Debate, exchange of ideas in a robust, respectful way. So he was beginning to see, okay, some of what his people were doing he could step back and objectify and say that's not a really good idea. So that and that's a developmental move. Okay, so I'm going to guess, and again, if Adam Hoffman ever hears this, I don't doubt that he will, but maybe he will. Maybe he's questioning really. Okay, so then who are my people? If it's not this kind of closing system in the university that restricts speech in the name of protecting people, who are my people? And that's the ongoing question we need to ask. And as you said so eloquently, the reason that you and I, seem to play nice together, and we've been playing since last June, give or take. We've never met in person. Is because even if we have a difference of opinion on a specific issue or point, we have this alignment that allows us to respect the difference of opinion and not lose sight of who, I don't lose sight of who you are. You don't lose sight of who I am. And we're beyond identifying by, we're aware of our skin pigmentation, our ethnic backgrounds, our racial backgrounds, our gender, etc. But we're not identified by that. We're identified by our alignment and our attunement around values and principles and how we live. And so I just wanted to, that was fresh in my mind because I just read that probably an hour before we got on, on this podcast. And, I just appreciated what he wrote, and it's hard for me to read. So if he's a senior at Princeton, he's like 21 or 22 years old. So I could be his grandfather, which frightens me. But so,
to this question, I really think this question really gives us the opportunity to really, in today's time, talk about the energy of really around this, because I think everybody is really looking for their people, whether it's intentionally, or unconsciously. You're looking for your people because the energy that you're putting out there is going to attract certain people in your life, whether you intentionally are putting it out there, or not. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. I can't remember his name, but the guy who created Dilbert, he's now Dilbert's being pulled from pretty much all major media publications because he responded to a tweet. And that's what I'm saying, is whether it's consciously or unconsciously, or intentionally and not intentionally, he responded to a tweet that someone set him up, where he threw out his real opinion on his podcast, saying that regards to, I forgot exactly again his quote, but I know what he was alluding to is that Black people either don't trust or don't like white people. And then his suggestion was that all white people stop dealing with all Black people. Okay. And whether, he truly felt that, and he's always felt that through the years, or this tweet triggered that kind of response. See, that's what I'm saying, as far as we got to be careful, because the way the media is really, and I blame politicians as well, because they're leveraging this difference in us.
Yeah.
And it's both sides, leveraging that difference in our opinions and saying, well, the other side is bad. The other side is horrible. The other side is stupid. Whether it's a Republican saying about the Democrats, or Democrats saying about Republicans, and what they're not really considering trying to get voted in is that, and that's why I wish all American people will really wake up and realize that no matter who's in office, we're not benefiting from that. Like, again, let's talk about Marjorie Taylor Greene. She had the audacity to say in a tweet that she was at a restaurant with her staff having dinner, and someone came in and began to just, violate their space and just disrupt their whole dinner, so they wasn't able to work. She talks about how bad the country's getting and how the other side is just so hateful now, and people can't just have discourse, political discourse, without hating one another and resorting to that kind of tactics. And this is the same woman that during the presidential State of the Union address yelled out while Biden was speaking, "You're a liar." Yeah. So it's like the audacity to, when it's you that's being assaulted that way, you don't like it and you want to call out the political discourse. But when you're in a forum that definitely requires everyone, whether you disagree or not with what's being said, the respectful, professional, courteous thing to do is be quiet and allow the president of the United States to go ahead and speak at the State of the Union without being interrupted. So it just shows you how folks will even be hypocritical
Yeah.
in their positions as well. So I just want to point that out. And I'm sure I can come up with an example on the Democratic side, because the Democrats are definitely the ones that's throwing out cancel culture and everything they're doing, which is, I think, dividing more people who would not normally be politically conservative. They're getting pushed into that particular tribe now because of the woke culture and canceling people, and folks like, I don't necessarily agree with that, so now I have to just choose this side over here, and it's forcing people to think that way along the lines.
Yeah, I love that example. And before we went live today, you and I were just talking about the Marjorie Taylor Greene piece. And I remembered, like, she was the woman who, when one of the Parkland, Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School students who survived the mass shooting down there, he was in D.C. testifying in front of Congress. This is pre-COVID, I'm pretty sure. Like, she was walking down the street, and this is not funny, but her hypocrisy, she was walking down the street as he was walking towards the Capitol building with her phone on, videotaping, and she was harassing him around gun legislation and stuff. So, so it's okay if I do it, but it's like the adult thing we used to hear, do as I say, not as I do, right? That growing up, I used to hear that. But as you were speaking, there's this has been going on such a long time. I want to read a book title. It's one of the books I cite briefly in my book. I just want to read the title. It's written by a guy that's no longer alive. His name is Nat Hentoff, and he was a writer for the Village Voice in New York City for years, primarily as a music critic. But he was also a pretty outspoken critic about how the left and the right like pointed their fingers at each other. So listen to the title of this book. It's because it's what we're talking about, and this was published in '92. Free speech for me, but not for thee. How the American left and right relentlessly censor each other. So that's a book that was written in '92 and I found him a really interesting character because he was clear. I'm not saying he was always right, but he was a real clear thinker. He might have always been right. I don't know. But he was a guy who was a bit of an enigma because when he would occasionally be called in to sit on panels for different political debates. And there was one specific one. This is tied in with Who Are My People, where he was a really frustrating guy and a good way to deal with. And it was a Harvard-sponsored debate, and they would take on constitutional issues, and they would invite members of the press, established members of the scientific community or academia, actual sittings, justices from the various courts. They'd have, Bork was on. I think Antonin Scalia was on a couple of times, but they would have in the abortion debate and, reduced down to, pro-life or pro-choice. That's how they reduced that debate. And he was a guy who was liberal across the board. I mean, if you look at his politics, he was a liberal, and he admitted that. I'm not projecting it onto him. But when it came to the phrase pro-life, like he was against the death penalty, he was anti-war. He sided on the side of the pro-life folks, which was a complete frustration to the other liberals who were, pro-choice, because he basically said, when I say pro-life, I don't just mean it post-birth. I mean it, once it's conception, there's a beginning of life there. And so he was just a really kind of free thinker that way. He didn't just say, okay, I'm liberal, so I buy into all of that. Those are my people. And he didn't say, okay, I'm pro-life, so I belong with all the conservative viewpoints, because he definitely didn't belong there. He was a free thinker. And that's what leads me to the second point I wanted to make, and you touched on this when way you described it. You said, so she's going to poke you a little bit now. You said, so the woke culture, the unhealthy version of it, that wields wokeness as a weapon. There's nothing wrong with being awake. In fact, we want to be awake. But when we start saying I'm woke and you're not, that's an unskillful move. But you said that, that movement forces people to kind of align more with the right. And I think that's true-ish. But the problem I have with is that it forces them, because that just means then that they don't have a choice.
Mm.
And yeah, I know that's not what you meant. So I'm pretty sure we agree on that. But we all always have a choice. And what's lacking, if somebody feels forced because of the woke movement to move to the right, what's lacking, I think, then with that individual is some level of self-reflection and critical thinking, because you're not forced to do anything. I mean, a friend of mine said, if somebody puts a gun to your head in an alley in the city and says, give me your money, I'm going to blow your brains out. You always have a choice. That's not a great choice, right? But there's a choice, right? Blow my brains out. I'm not giving you my wallet. That's who would do that. I don't know, but it's always a choice. We always have that. Then going back to our conversations in the past with Viktor Frankl. You have a choice. In the worst of circumstances, you will have the last of the human freedoms, choosing your attitude in any given circumstance or situation. Now, when all of the choices are bad, it doesn't feel like a choice, but it always is. And I know when I say that out loud, as we're saying it now, I know it's really easy for me to say, sitting with you on a Wednesday morning and just talking about the concept. But those moments in my life when I've been in a situation where I had choices, none of which I wanted, I didn't want any of them. It's not, I wasn't smiling then, and it was a really difficult thing to do. So I'm not making light of it, but I believe that we always have it.
That's true. That's true. And to your point, I think that's to me, when you brought up my point when I used the term forced.
Yeah.
And I'm now thinking about it, I still stay with that only because I believe they think that, not that they don't have the choice. I believe they think they're being forced. And as a result of that, that's when that to me is at the crux of our conversation about being fully human. Yeah. So when I say they think that, it's because they're not on the path of personal growth. So they think that, okay, well, I may be liberal in my views because liberal seems to be more in line with the fact that I believe everybody should have free health care. I believe everybody should get minimum wage. I believe everybody should be treated fairly and equally based on the character, who they are. They should not be discriminated against each other. So I'm normally liberal in my thoughts. That's what people think. Mm-hmm. And then as with the result, as you say, the woke culture being used as a weapon now is causing people to say, yeah, but I don't necessarily agree with that tactic. So now I have to align myself with these individuals over here who I disagree with on most all the other issues, but this really gets in sticks in my craw, so to speak, use of those Southern expression. And I say where you're suffering is because you're not seeking that growth. And that growth to me is not just a good suggestion. Like, we say you should work out every single day, or you should, drink 8 to 10 glasses of water a day. Those things are great suggestions, and most people don't follow that. I think the growth mindset is mandatory if we are to have harmony in life as you get older. If your life is going to be more peaceful when you get older. I mean, because think about it, who really wants to be, if you're in your 30s and you live a life where you're kind of welcoming of all people, you love all people for the most part, unless somebody gets on your nerves. But for the most part, you don't have any hatred or any outward animosity toward any group of people for whatever reason may be. Mm-hmm. And who wants to be now 30 years down the road and you're hating a group of people because you allow politics and you allow all these other things to come into your life and skew you away from that? Like, for example, now it's coming out as a result of the voter dimension suing Fox News and forcing Rupert Murdoch to go testify. And they had to admit the fact that, we lied. We lied about the election being false. And Then I don't know if you saw where they disclosed or a lot of the internal communications, emails and texts between a lot of the Fox News hosts, Hannity and Tucker Carlson and the woman, I'm forgetting her name right now on top of my head,
Well, I think Laura Ingraham.
Laura Ingraham.
Yeah.
And they can clearly show through their text they didn't really believe what they were saying, right? And see, some people believe that Fox News speaks to those people. These are my people, to the point of our topic today.
Yeah.
And now you realize that if you're really listening and you're open, that they're not your people. They're just using you and feeding off you just as much as someone who likes sports, and talk about someone like a Skip Bayless who chooses his topics based off what's trending. So if he sees, oh, here's a trending topic, this is what's hot right now, this is what I'll talk about. And I'm always going to choose the adversarial approach because, people either love or hate a particular guest or host.
Yeah.
If they're indifferent to you, they're not going to watch you. So they love you, they're going to watch you. They hate you because you're always going to say something that's antagonistic or controversial. They're going to watch you. And that's where the world has become, because people are so consumed, whether it's politicians or media personalities or just YouTubers. Everyone now who's in that space, for the most part, who are not growth minded, who don't practice what I consider, you see the banner above my head, spiritual capitalism,
right.
You don't practice those 10 commandments, then you're allowing yourself to just focus on making money. Yeah. And making money means the more clicks I get, the more eyeballs I get, the more people respond to me, the more engagement I get on my posts, then the better off I'm doing, the more I can now go out and get more sponsorship dollars. I can, eventually have YouTube consider me to be a top earner. All that is the equivalent of that instant gratification that down the road is going to be much harmful, not only to you, but it's going to be harmful to people around you and lead you further away from being and connecting with yourself on a fully human level.
Yeah, I mean, I love the example of the Fox News, the scandal about they knew they were lying on national and local television and kept doing it anyway, and tying it back into the money thing, because that just reminded me of we speak about the elements of shadow that I identify in the book, and I won't list all of them. They include ignorance, arrogance, bigotry, fear, and also greed and excess. And if you think about a major news organization, as Fox News is, and even at the other end, there's other examples. I don't think you can find many examples. I have a hard time listening sometimes to the attitude and tone on the more liberal leaning, like MSNBC, even if I agree with what they say, how they say it, like the eye rolling and the superiority thing is just like, it doesn't speak to me. It's just, it's antagonistic. But for any of those, I mean, we're looking at people who are making a lot of money every day, putting on makeup, looking into a camera and saying things that the advertisers approve of, because they need advertising. That's how they get paid. And it's a whole skewed perspective because it's based in making money and not necessarily based in, the core of what I would call true journalism, getting to the truth of what happened and sharing it with the public. And I forget who it was recently. So they get caught into, to tie it together, well, who are our people? Okay, we have to look at the ratings and who's watching us and what their values are. So we have to keep pandering to them. Our message has to be presented, if I'm MSNBC, to these people. If I'm Fox, to these people. If CNN has said under new management, they're going to try to be more mainstream and less left-leaning. But they're all, they need to keep their viewers coming back to make money. And sometimes, I'm not a great economist or corporate guy. I don't know the inner workings of that, but I pay attention to the world and human beings, and that gets in the way of truth telling. And one mistake that was made decades ago is that when it's no longer the airways per se. It used to be, we had antenna on top of our homes, and we got the news on television through the public airways. That's what it was.
Right.
And the big mistake was that the news organizations and the federal government never agreed to say, okay, you can advertise all day long, but for an hour a night or a half an hour every night at 6:00, local time, there's going to be newscasts that have no advertising. In other words, there's no money that informs how we're going to report the news. And that hour is for the American people to get real journalists speaking about the news, absent any corporate interest. And that's not an original thought with me. I just heard somebody say that a few years ago, and I wish I could remember who it was. And we don't have that anymore. Some upstarts online and stuff are trying to do that. There's news services that are trying to, but virtually none of them can keep going without outside money coming in because of the costs of, paying journalists and all of that. So it's, who are my people is skewed in the public, in broadcast media for sure, and to a lesser degree, but I think still to a certain extent in print media, by what the financiers say, that the advertisers say, well, you can't say that on the air if you want us to continue advertising, because it's not in alignment with us. And that gets back into development. I just can't help tying this together. But Robert Keegan's language around adult development, and I'll just take two examples of it. But most of America, who tends to lean left or right, operate in what Keegan called the socialized mind. They're still stuck in cultural givens and aligning with a set of, what society tells them to do. The next developmental move in Keegan's model is the self-authoring mind, where it's no longer I'm at the effect of society's views. I'm still aware of them. I have to be aware of them, but I self-author. That's what Nat Hentoff did in his pro-life stance. He said, I'm liberal leaning in most cases, but when I say pro-life, that means I'm against war. I'm against taking a human life in any way. And he wasn't open to the argument saying, well, it's not a fully developed life yet. He basically would say, well, we know from history that fertilized egg, that embryo is not going to be an oak tree if it's inside of a woman. It's not going to be a rattlesnake. It's not going to be a piece of broccoli. It's going to be a human being if it's allowed to gestate. And so he was a really, frustrating guy, but a real clear thinker in that regard. He was self-authoring. He wasn't caught up in what was expected of him as a more or less liberal perspective, a liberal thinker. And that's getting back to your point. People aren't committed to growth, growth mindset. So they're just, okay, here's the world as I was told it was, and I have to just hold on to that and stay stable in that so I don't get scared of change or whatever. So,
the more I really think about, like I said, on several different levels, the topic today of who your people, it takes me back to when I first started riding motorcycles.
Okay.
And when you're a motorcyclist, of course, I was riding they call them the crotch rocket, the Japanese fast bikes. That's what I start off with. One of the things that people would do when you ride a motorcycle and you'll see a motorcyclist coming from the opposite direction where you're going towards him, you'll put your hand out like this.
Yeah.
And that was just kind of an unwritten way of saying, hello, you're my people, right?
Yeah.
I acknowledge you.
Yeah.
But then there was discrimination within that because the Harley riders would acknowledge the crotch rocket riders, right?
Yeah.
And so then you have that division within that. Now, but then what was interesting was that the folks who did not ride, who rode the touring bikes that were not Harley, like a Honda, a Gold Wing or something like that, they would acknowledge the crotch rocket. So it was like Harleys put themselves in a whole separate category.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting that we as human beings initially, or I would say, want to begin to divide ourselves because it kind of makes sense. almost, logically. Like I advocate for it, connect with intent, choose your own people you align with, not based on their race, not based on their gender, not based on their sexual orientation or religious dogma, but more importantly, what their values and their principles are and their purpose in life. Build relationships with them if you want to have more meaning and more a fulfilled life. That's what I advocate. But then I also look at the other extreme of it. And, I had this conversation with my brother the other day. We talked about sports. And I was like, I don't no longer watch football, where he's a football fanatic, like truly fan. Like he watches every week. He watches the preseason games. He's a San Francisco fan. And he talked about how, in his opinion, his experience as well, that sports transcend racism. Like he said, he's been in bars where there's been white men and he have a San Francisco jersey on, and they see him with a San Francisco jersey on, they'll buy him a beer, strictly because they look at him as, well, you're my people, at least in this respect. We're aligned on the same team, So I just really think it's interesting. Now, again, I just want to bring this back around to say that we do all this unintentionally. We let marketing tell us, if you're a San Francisco fan, then you got to hate the Cowboys. That's your rivals, or whatever the rival sports team is, and people get caught up in that. But what I recognize on a daily basis is how, at least in the business world, I'm going to be more specific there, people don't see the importance of building relationships with people who they're aligned with there, and not asking, who's my people there. And I think that's the biggest mistake, because when you don't do that and you let money be the reason you connect with someone, in other words, I'm looking to, like most people say, they have networking functions, and you go to a networking function, whether it's virtually or as in person, with the intent to build relationships. And it's just a variety of people, and they tell you the industries that's represented, the type of professionals may be there, whether it's doctors, whether it's lawyers, whether it's consultants, etc. But you have no idea what those people's principles are. Are you in line with those individuals or not? And you have to create speed networking, where you sit there and in 30 seconds you try to form a connection. And to me, all this is just an exercise in futility, because at the end of the day, you're not going to be happy if you met 30 people this month. I guarantee most people won't keep more than 2 people ongoing 6 months later, that you still communicating with, you're still dialoguing with. Like you and I, for example, it's rare that you're going to meet someone the way we met, never met in person, as you said earlier, which is true. But here we are almost a year now, and we're still consistently committed. Now, we've missed a few weeks, but for the most part, we've been on doing this podcast more than we've been off not doing a podcast. And that's that commitment. And that's because the alignment holds a stronger, what I call connecting thread, than being in common, which I tell folks, seek alignment, not what's in common.
Yeah. We'll have to meet for a meal, like somewhere along the Jersey Turnpike. It's in South Jersey, whatever the halfway point is between where we're sitting at some point. I love the motorcycle example. I was laughing when you use that, because when I was in my early 20s, I had a motorcycle, and I almost embarrassed to say, you had the crotch rocket, and then you have the Harley riders and all that. So I had my best friend taught me to ride, and my only bike. I didn't ride for long, but I rode for about 5 years. But I had a Honda CB 360, which is kind of it's not even a mid-range bike. It's not the smallest, but it's pretty small. But I know it could go 90 though, which was terrifying. But it went pretty fast. But I remember, and my biggest memory of making the hand signal was especially when on a spring day or summer day in upstate New York, whatever, we'd take day trips up and just ride and explore, back roads and things. We just loved it. It's beautiful, some really nice roads, 2 lanes and 4 lanes that weren't interstates, and occasionally you'd meet the biker clubs coming in the opposite direction. There'd be a long line of guys, mostly on Harleys, but a lot of times it was other cruisers, like it'd be a Honda or Yamaha or Suzuki that looked kind of Harley-like, and they were all in the clubs together. And what I remember was, based on some of them would just ignore, my buddy Paul and me, because these little putt bikes. but some of them would. So even within that group where they had, were Harleys, and what is that thing you have between your legs there, because it's not even a real motorcycle, right? But some of them would. Some of them would just wave, just give, would signal. We would always signal because we wanted to be accepted into the big boy group, right? And so we used to laugh about it because, we recognized that what we were riding, we were doing what we do. They were doing what they do. But even within the group, there were some guys who just said, they went beyond the kind of the arrogance, the elitism of the Harley group, let's say, that, the hogs, and they would, acknowledge the two little guys on their bikes. So, but I love that example. There's so many informal examples like that with the sports fans and all of that, where, okay, you must be okay because you're wearing that jersey. So,
I mistakenly, once I was on my motorcycle, and I say mistakenly because I saw a headlight coming at me and I could tell it was a single headlight. So I put my hand out to, acknowledge and speak, and it turned out to be a scooter. And I had to quickly grab my hand back, and I'm like, I definitely can't speak to a scooter. There's just rules to this. A scooter, if you can't go over 75 miles per hour, you can't get acknowledged as a rider. You're more a commuter, and that just happens to be the way you get around town. Nothing, not judging scooters. It's just not the same thing as a motorcycle. You're not going to ride to California on a scooter, across state lines more specifically. But I thought about that when you talked about your CB360, and but we've reached a part of the show where we want to give people some clear directions on how they can begin to take next steps in their lives and implement some of the lessons you laid out in the book on how they should proceed on identifying who are their people.
Yeah. So great. So there's a distinction that I have found is really important for my own exploration of who my people are. And it's the difference between right now, if I look honestly at who my people are, who are the people that I spend time with and feel aligned with, what's the true answer to that right now, as opposed to what do I aspire to? What would I like? Who would I like my people to be? And differentiate those, because sometimes you ask people any question and they answer it not just who are my people, but they'll answer it based on their aspiration as opposed to their reality. So get clear on what's true right now and acknowledge what you aspire to. And then just take a look at those individuals and or groups with whom you have what I would describe as a felt sense of alignment or attunement. And the way you can recognize that is it feels comfortable when you're engaging with that person or that group, even if you sometimes disagree. It doesn't mean like you're robots and you're in lockstep together, but feel what feels good. What brings up a healthy narrative or a healthy sense in you, and it could feel safe. I don't like to use that expression that much, but it doesn't have to be safe. It just has to feel healthy. And then notice who they are. What do they have in common or not? And begin to get a sense of who your people are. Because at the far end, people aspire to, the more liberal perspective, they want to say, oh, all human beings are my people. And that's a great aspiration. But I look around my friends who are more conservative, more liberal, who are kind of in the middle somewhere, and I know very few people who really live that way. A lot of them believe it and want it, but how upset do they get when something bad happens in Iran or Iraq to some people? Not the same way they feel that what happens in Baltimore or Brooklyn or wherever they happen to be sitting. So feel into that, just get it. How does it feel when I'm with these people or those people, and get a real sense of what's true for you now. And then what do you aspire to? So make that move would be a good way into this, I think.
Well, I think those are excellent steps. I think there's an excellent strategy of what you laid out there, because I think that today is more critical than ever before to really know who your people are. And
Yeah.
again, it can't just be chosen based off what you have in common. Don't let what you have in common be the reason why you say these are my people, whether it's again skin color, whether it's religion, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's geographically, Baltimoreans are my people, or West Baltimoreans are my people, or high school. When I grew up in St. Louis, it's all about your high school. Even when you're in your 50s, what high school did you go to? It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
that, because people want to, as a natural tendency to kind of classify and categorize people so I can know how to deal with you. You tell me, if I ask you if I'm blind, I ask you a series of questions because I wasn't born blind. So I have this historical context to set. And I say, please describe yourself to me. And you say, well, I'm a white man. Okay, what's your age? I'm 60. What's your, race or ethnicity? I'm Italian. What's your religion? I'm Catholic.
Mm.
I'm a really, or what's your sexual orientation? I'm straight. Are you single? So I'm asking all these questions because now I'm forming my mind. This is how you must think. This is how you must operate,
Yeah.
right? And that to me, there's a Indian philosopher. I have difficulty pronouncing his name, but what he said was, "When you label me, you negate me."
Mm.
And I've often thought about that, and I said I actually like that. I think if somebody can label me, then you negate everything else I'm about, because I can't be fully human if you're going to just label me on any of those labels I just laid out. So I just wanted to add that to what you were saying as well. And we've reached the part of the show where we want to kind of share who we believe, whether it's historic or current individuals who we believe are exhibiting the behaviors of being fully human.
Yeah.
And so I'll allow you to go first, Reggie. Do you have anybody in mind who you want to share with us?
Yeah, I do, and I'm trying to remember if I've actually mentioned this person before, and even if I have, and I really don't remember, I'm going to mention him again because he's a a living person right now, and he's actually a close friend of mine, and then there's a joke about him, and again, if this sounds familiar, I'm not going to apologize if it sounds familiar because he deserves a second notice. So I tell a joke that a pilot, a sailor, an engineer. A single dad, and one other person, and somebody else walks into a bar. Oh no, it's Larry Pisani. So he's a good friend of mine, and he's all those things: self-taught engineer. He can fly a plane. He doesn't do it too much more. He's motorcyclist too. He rides a bike. But he's up in Boston now at a major hospital, and he's been up there for about 2 weeks, and he's about to get on a lung transplant list. He might be on it already as of today. And we knew this was coming for about 3 or 4 years. And he didn't have any symptoms of this disease called pulmonary fibrosis until about 3 years ago. And then he had some symptoms, and he inherited it from his mom. And he's this great father. He's a good guy. He's a funny guy. No, and he's also a clown. He's a professional clown. That's the part I forgot. So a clown, a pilot, and what they all walk in. And he's navigating this really significant transition and surgery in a way that is striking to me in terms of his equanimity, his handling it with his significant other, whose name is Janice, and his 2 kids who are, in their 20s. Just in terms of being fully human in a difficult moment, and he's just turned 60, so he's not an old, depending on your perspective, he's not an old man. But that's my guy. So Larry Pisani, make sure he watches this, listens to this podcast too, so he can feel famous for about 3 minutes. So Larry's my fully human guy today.
All right. Well, thank you. And, shout out to you, Larry. Yeah. You listening. I'm going to go with you, Reggie. I think that, you're writing this book, and the topic you chose in this book, the fact that you were willing to show empathy and attention to detail, as well as show enough compassion and love to make sure that you wrote about different various groups, even though you're not of those groups, but you wrote about the pain they suffered, the trauma they've gone through in a very compelling and interesting and respectful way. And then at the same time, you also put steps, as we talked about in chapter 11, the key questions you're asking. That to me shows me that you're on a quest and you're on a journey and you're exhibiting these fully human behaviors. And then, as well as the fact, like I said, we've mentioned it several times during this show, the fact that we've never met each other, but yet and still, you've always been honorable, you've always been respectful, professional, um, showing up on time every time for the show, prepared. So that to me is someone who I definitely look forward to working with. I look forward to these Wednesday mornings. I hate when I can't make it for whatever reason, but it's definitely something. And as I get older in my life, you learn to begin to appreciate those people you meet in your life. When I say those people, ones who take pride and consideration and respect and bring a positive energy and just overall good people. So you're my example of that today, Reggie.
Yeah, thank you. I'm humbled, and you put me in a position of receiving a compliment and gratitude, which makes that's my edginess. I have to work on receiving that in a open way and not feeling like hiding from it. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, it's well earned. And like I said, you continue to live it. You take pride in what you do. It's a lot of things you can be doing at the age you're at right now, but you continue to learn, to grow, to teach, to coach, and continue to want to be a servant. So I think that definitely recognize that definitely to me, you need to be recognized for that during this hour, at least.
Thank you, King. And so here's my deflection with humor. So now you're definitely one of my people.
Same here, same here. And listening audience, we want to thank you all again for listening to another episode of Fully Human Connections podcast. We definitely encourage you all to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to continue to build. That's something new we're going to be adding this year. It's a YouTube channel. We want to be engaged with you all. We want to hear your comments, read your comments about what you think about the topics we're talking about. Definitely, again, Reggie, real quick before we end the show, share where they can buy your book.
Yeah, so the book is definitely available. You can get it online at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and then I encourage people to ask their to support independent booksellers. Go to your local bookstore and ask them to order it. They can definitely order it, and even go to your local library and ask them to get a copy of it so it's available for library loans. So but it's definitely available. Online is the unfortunately sometimes the easiest way to get it, because I do like independent booksellers too. So,
but thank you. And I think about every time I look at your cover, I always see something else that stands out to me more, as though it's like this is the phrase this week. So the phrase this week for me is our collective national shadow. Like that just really stood out to me as I looked at the cover of the book and thinking about our collective national shadow, meaning that we have to understand that we are together, we want to be or not. We can choose whether we want to be divisive in our minds or do we want to collectively come together and deal with our national shadow and bring healing in that context. So I just want to close on thanking again, Reggie, for your investment of time, energy, professionalism, for being on the show, choosing the appropriate topic that continues to help guide us towards the journey of becoming more fully human. I want to thank our listening audience as well for listening to another episode of the Fully Human Connections podcast. And we'll be here again next Wednesday at 10 a.m. And definitely looking forward to exploring these options with you all together. Thank you all.